Well, good afternoon again, everyone, and happy Sabbath to you all. Hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving again. I'd like you to take your Bibles and turn over to Daniel. We're going to continue on this series of Daniel. And here we are in chapter 2 now. And this is the third message of this series. Don't know how far we'll get, but we'll figure that out as we go along. But in Daniel chapter 2, we come upon one of the most fascinating chapters, I think, in the whole Bible. We get a view inside the life of the first great world-ruling king, empire king, and his interaction with one of the most righteous and wisest man that has ever lived. And Nebuchadnezzar, the king, was still a relatively young king, and Daniel was a young exile, probably a teenager in his late teens, possibly middle to late teens when he came over. And so here we have two young men. Nebuchadnezzar might have been in his 30s. We think maybe 30, somewhere around that age. These two young men, basically, that were standing to the center of God's plan at this time. And this chapter reveals to mankind a prophetic outline of the Gentile world powers from that point in history forward, reaching all the way to the end, to the return of Jesus Christ. And so we have an overview that God reveals to a king whom he even calls my servant. He calls Nebuchadnezzar his servant elsewhere, that shows the rise and the fall of ruling world empires and what to watch for before the kingdom of God would be set up on this earth. And so it's here in Babylon, that ancient city, that great pagan center that the system later symbolized in Scripture as Mystery Babylon religion, we see that in Revelation 17, or the Revelation, is rooted and developed. And it's here that God reveals his plan to a Gentile king, and through that king, to his own people. So through this chapter, that this chapter is often only thought of in terms of the great image. That's kind of what we think of. I remember as a little kid, that's kind of what you associate Daniel chapter 2, this great image, this amazing image that we'll get to. But there are some jewels of truth and wisdom tucked away that I hope to bring out today. So in Daniel chapter 2 and verse 1, look what it says here. And in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams, and his spirit was troubled, and his sleep went from him. Now, there's a couple things I want to bring out here. Some people will think, well, he dreamed dreams. This was like many dreams, like multiple dreams. And this was probably one dream that he had multiple times. This is what this means. This dream came over and over again. I remember when I was really young, I had a dream that I can kind of go through a little bit right now even, that I dreamt multiple times. And I don't know what was going on. Maybe it was sermons I was hearing, but I think it was during tribulation. I think I had this horrible dream of like being in a battle scene and my sister and I hiding under some protective, I don't know what it was. It's like a shed or something. And I had this dream over and over again. And I think that's what he means here. He just dreamed this dream multiple times, and it troubled him because he's getting the same dream over and over again. We also have what appears to be a discrepancy right off the bat here about the chronology of the book. So when Daniel and his friends presented before the king after 3 years, was this before or after the interpretation of the vision? Because we know in the first book, from the first chapter of Daniel, that he was to be trained for 3 years and then present before the king. Now, we don't know for certain, but it's most likely that it would have been before the interpretation. So Daniel was carried away into Babylon in the first year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. That's what we know. And then for 3 years, it says in chapter 1 of verse 5, he was placed under instructors to learn the ways of Babylon. And of course, during that time, he would not be considered one of the wise men of Babylon. He wouldn't have been considered that, and he wouldn't have been considered to be any part of public affairs at this time. But when we see the edict from Nebuchadnezzar to kill the wise men of Babylon, Daniel and his friends were included in that group. So how do we make sense of the 3 years of teaching and the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar? Well, the answer is the Babylonians didn't count the king's partial first year as year one. That was the regnal year. That was his ascension year. So once you factor in that ascension year as basically year one, Daniel's 3 years of training fit very comfortably with Nebuchadnezzar still being in his second year when the dream happens. Now look at verse 2. Then the king commanded to call the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king. And the king said to them, I have dreamed a dream, and my spirit is troubled to know the dream. So because of the king's agitation, so he immediately calls in the experts. I need to know the best of the kingdom that they're going to bring. I'm going to bring all these in. So he calls every category of the specialists he has, the scholars, the occult practitioners, the astrologers, and especially the Chaldeans, who are the professional class of wise men and the diviners. You know, if anyone in Babylon can reach the gods in his mind, that's who it would be. These people could reach the gods. So why wasn't Daniel and his 3 friends there? Well, most likely because of their young age at that time. And this was a society that really relied on, I think, older, what would they would consider wise men to be able to come in and talk to the king. Now, certainly there was some political involvement as well, no doubt, as there always is and always has been. But Daniel and his friends, being as young as they were and just completing their training, would really not be a logical choice, I think, to bring in before the king at this point, especially for whoever's in charge of them, because it'll be looked bad upon for that person to bring them in if they had nothing to offer. Look at what it says in verse 4. Then spoke the Chaldeans to the king in the Syrian language, O king, live forever, tell your servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation. Now from this point to chapter 7, the book switches into Aramaic, and it's really what we would consider the international language of the empire, I guess we call the lingua franca of the day, the common ordinary speaking. It would literally be called maybe the world language, as he revealed this dream. And in verse 5, the king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the thing is gone from me. If you make it known unto me the dream and the interpretation, if you make not known unto me the dream and the interpretation thereof, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made a dunghill. That's quite rash, I think. But some think the thing is gone from me means that he forgot the dream. Well, I forgot it, and you're going to have to tell me the dream. I don't think he forgot his dream. The context suggests something else, that he dreamed more than once, like I said, that it was burned in his mind. Now, I want to read here, this is the ESV, because I don't think it has in the King James I could be wrong, or the King James, New King James, but in Daniel chapter 2, verse 5 here, it says, but if you show me the dream and its interpretation, hold on a second, let me go back. Here we go. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the word from me is firm, is what it says here. The word from me is firm. Well, in other words, instead of the thing is gone from me. So what he might be saying here is, my decision is fixed, which it makes more sense in the context. My decision is fixed. Here's what I've said. I'm not changing the terms. This is what's going to happen. So he remembers the dream, and he's testing whether or not they're going to be able to tell him the dream. Do they really have supernatural access to the gods? Or do they have this? We're going to find out. So you also get to, like I say, a look at really the impetuous nature of Nebuchadnezzar. He can be rash and extreme in his reactions, and his death threat shows that. Verse 6, but if you show the dream and the interpretation thereof, you shall receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore, show me the dream and the interpretation thereof. And so here's the contrast of great rewards now. It's almost like it's one ditch or the other with Nebuchadnezzar. I wouldn't say he was bipolar, but it sure seems like he could have been bipolar. I'm not going to give some psychological diagnosis there, but he was an odd person to deal with, it seemed like. You die or you have the good life. It's one or the other. It's you're dead or you're going to live high on the hog. Verse 7, they answered the second time and said, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation. The king answered and said, I know of a certainty that you would gain time, because you see the word from me is firm. And there again he says it, the word from me is firm. But if you make not known unto me the dream, there is but one law for you. For you have prepared lying and corrupt words to speak before me till the time should be changed. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can show me the interpretation thereof. It's interesting, a couple things here. Maybe he knows more about these men than what we know about them, if he's assuming that they're going to lie to him and they're going to buy time. So maybe they've done this in the past. I'm not really sure here. But there's also, again, the other indication that he knew his dream and didn't forget it. I mean, if they could tell him the dream, then he knew that they could interpret it. And this is really more of a test on the wise men. This dream was so important to him that he wasn't going to leave anything to chance. That's not what Nebuchadnezzar was going to do. Now look at verse 10. The Chaldeans answered before the king and said, there is not a man upon the earth that can show the king's matter, for as much as no king, lord, or ruler has asked such a thing of any magician, enchanter, or Chaldean, and it is a rare thing that a king requires. And there is no other that can show it before the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. So when it came to the supernatural, they knew very little truth. They didn't seem to know it. But one truth they did speak, that no mere human could reveal such a thing. No one could do this. And in their minds, they were thinking of the false gods. But there's an irony here, because in reality, only the true God in heaven could make the dream known. That's only where it was going to come from. Now let's read from Daniel chapter 2, verse 12 down. For this cause the king was angry and very furious and commanded to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. Again, we see the impulsive nature here with an order like this. Verse 13, so the decree went forth, and the wise men were to be slain, and they sought Daniel and his companions to be slain. And then Daniel returned answer with counsel and prudence to Arioch, the captain of the guard, the king's guard, who was gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. And he answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree so urgent from the king? And then Arioch made the thing known to Daniel. And Daniel went in and desired of the king that he would appoint him a time, and he would show the king the interpretation. And so Daniel went to his house and made the thing known to his friends, his companions, that they would desire mercies of the God of heaven concerning this secret, that Daniel and his companions should not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then was the secret revealed unto Daniel in a vision of the night. And then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. And Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, and for wisdom and might are his. And he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and sets them up. He gives wisdom unto the wise, knowledge to them that have understanding. And he reveals the deep and secret things, and he knows what is in the darkness. And the light dwells with them. And I thank you and praise you, O God of my fathers, who has given me wisdom and might, and has now made known unto me what we desired of you, for you have made known unto us the king's matter. So Daniel was presented with a very serious problem here. His life was in jeopardy. His very life was in jeopardy. And notice that he was not going to sit idly by. He wasn't going to do that. So he spoke with the captain of the executioners with prudence, and he chose his words very carefully. In other words, he didn't mouth off to him, what do you think's going to happen here? Why is this going to No, he was very prudent with his words. And he was allowed an audience with the king, and the king permitted him more time. But time was of the essence now, and Daniel did what Daniel knew to do. He went to his three friends, and they prayed. They prayed to God. You know, time and time again through this book, you will see Daniel in regular, constant contact with God in prayer. It's a good example for us. And you'll see Daniel be allowed by God to be put in dangerous and deadly situations. And every time, Daniel will turn to God for the answers. And here, they called on God for, I think, two purposes. Number one, they desired mercies of the God of heaven. And that's what it specifically says. And I think this is significant because when a person prays for mercy, it's really an admission that any answer they receive from God is undeserved. Any answer you receive from God is undeserved when you pray for mercy. They could have prayed, Lord, I pray to you 3 times a day. I fast twice a week. And I tithe on all of my increase. And I've been faithful before you. And this wicked king now here is going to take me and he's going to kill me. No, he didn't pray that. He prayed for the mercies of God from heaven. The first highlight of the prayer was the mercies of God. And it was a confession to him of how unworthy they really were and how much they really needed him. And then secondly, they prayed not to be killed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. They prayed not to be killed. This was clearly a focus of their prayer, that their lives would be spared, which leads to the question, is this seeking to save your life? I mean, is that what that is? I mean, some have suggested that this shouldn't be a focus for us, that if we try to seek to save our lives, then we're going to lose them. Well, that's not what this is talking about. This is missing the whole point here. Daniel was wise and prudent. And King Hezekiah, remember, what did he pray? He prayed for 15 more years of life. And he even appealed to God and he said, well, how can I praise you in the grave? How can I do that? And so he appealed to God. And so we see that God's reasonable. And God can be talked to as a friend as long as we have a friendship with him. That kind of relationship with him. And so Daniel and his friends were appealing for their lives, which also makes the point, brethren, that we should focus on the attributes of God that are best suited for the situation that we are in. God has all attributes, but we should focus on those attributes on the situation that we're in. Now, in Daniel's case, the appeal for mercy was to have pity on them. That's what he was asking for him. So this is not an appeal to the logic of God. This is an appeal to the heart of God. This is an appeal to the mercy of God. And so they are asking him to be moved with compassion for them. And this request most fittingly comes from a softened heart that's very tender. That's the request from our heart. You see, a hard and recalcitrant heart is not one that God will show pity on. If you want to say, you say to God, well, you owe me this. No, he doesn't owe you anything. Doesn't owe any of this to you. But this hardened heart, there's no substance, there's no life, there's no belief, there's no care, because it's just an expectation of deserving whatever it is you ask for. Well, I'm deserving of this, so you better go ahead and deliver it to me. That's not what Daniel and his friends prayed here. It's almost as if we think that we have it coming to us when we have a recalcitrant or an obstinate heart. It's not a true begging for mercy. It's just sort of a fake thing. It's not really the heart that God is going to look upon, where he says in Isaiah 66, upon this man will I look, of him who is of a contrite and a poor spirit. And so this was the type of spirit that Daniel and his friends had. This was a true heart-to-heart connection that God was seeking and is seeking with us today. Now, we're not told how long they prayed before Daniel was given the answer by God. I would assume that it was fairly soon because this was rather an urgent matter. The king wanted an answer to the prayer, so I don't think he's going to give him a lot of time. But notice, brethren, what happened once Daniel received the answer to the riddle of the dream in a vision. Did he run off to the king immediately? No, did he go to Arioch? Nope, he didn't do that either. Here's what he did, and I think it's appropriate maybe on this Thanksgiving weekend. He offered a prayer of thanksgiving. That's the first thing he did. He offered a prayer of thanksgiving. I want you to notice in Daniel chapter 2 and verse 20 here. Daniel answered and said, "Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his." And he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings, sets up kings, gives wisdom unto the wise, knowledge to them that have understanding. He reveals the deep and secret things. He knows what it is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. I thank you and praise you, O thou God of my fathers, who has given me wisdom and might, and has now made known unto me what we desired of you, for you have made known unto us the king's matter. So before he ever goes to Arioch, before he ever goes to the king, he stops and he offers a prayer of thanksgiving to God, praising him as the one who changes times and seasons, who removes kings and sets them up, and who reveals the deep things that no man would know except for him. This was a prayer of thanksgiving. And we see here, out of this prayer, is that everything God does deserves eternal praise and gratitude. Everything he does. For the one that sustains us and keeps us and guides our path, does he deserve anything less from us? He doesn't. I also want you to notice the attributes that Daniel gives to God in his prayer of thanksgiving. The question worth asking then is, for which of his attributes or his activities does God delight in being known? Which one of those does God delight in being known? And I think the answer is in that which is most needed by us to sustain us. If you need food, God is the abundant provider. You need clothing, he says, I'll clothe you more than the flower of the field that withers and dies. You need protection, God says, I'm your banner. You need healing, God says, I'm your healer. You need wisdom, ask, and I will provide it abundantly. See, whatever it is that we're lacking, God can provide it. And it's his desire. He delights in that. And Daniel needed to know, in this case, the king's matter, and God provided the answers for him. So on this occasion, he needed divine wisdom, and he needed divine power. And no doubt we can see why he needed wisdom. After all, he had to find out the contents of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. He was an impetuous king. But why was there a focus on divine power or might? Why was there a focus on that? Well, I would suggest that Daniel and his friends were fully aware that they were engaged in a warfare against demonic forces. Not just flesh and blood. They were engaged against demonic powers. And it was not only the power of a tyrant that concerned them, it was also the malevolent powers behind the scene. And really their only source of hope for this problem that they were up against was the God of the universe, the God that created everything, the Almighty God. You see, this prayer isn't just an example for battling for our physical lives against someone out to kill us. It's also an example to serve, to show us the resource that we have to live in a spiritually hostile environment. We should always look to God for that because we battle it on a daily basis. Don't forget, we have a young man here. We have a man probably in his teens, late teens, who is teaching us how to pray to God. It's remarkable. A young person who sets an example for all of us, young and old alike. God used him, and he tells us how to battle in a hostile environment, no matter what the conditions are. And so Daniel now has the confidence to approach the king with full assurance that God has unlocked the answer to the king's dream. And Daniel appears more confident than ever because of his prayer of thanksgiving as well. Because as we see in verse 21, he sees from the dream that it's God himself that sets up kings and takes them down. He's the one that does it. And it's God who set up Nebuchadnezzar. That's what he's saying. He set him up. And he made him the head of gold, not Nebuchadnezzar himself. So he sought that from God himself. And so this is assuring to Daniel that God's plan is firm and sure, and it is undeniable. Now let's go on here in Daniel chapter 2 and verse 24. Therefore Daniel went into Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. And he went and said to him, destroy not the wise men of Babylon. Bring me in before the king, and I will show unto the king the interpretation. Then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste, and said this to him, I found a man of the children of the captivity of Judah that will make known unto the king the interpretation. The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, are you able to make known unto me the dream which I have seen and the interpretation thereof? And Daniel answered before the king and said, the secret which the king has demanded can neither wise men, enchanters, magicians, nor soothsayers show unto the king. But there is a God in heaven that reveals secrets, and has made known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head upon your bed are these. Verse 29, as for you, O king, your thoughts came into your mind upon your bed. What should come to pass the hereafter? And he that reveals secrets has made known to you what shall come to pass. But as for me, this secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom, that I have more than any living, but to the intent that the interpretation may be made known to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your heart. Now, what we're about to read coming up constitutes an important portion of the sure word of prophecy. When God says something, it's going to happen. And he says to take heed. You would do well. He says this in 2 Peter chapter 1. Take heed as to a light shining in a dark place. So we need to take heed to the words that we're going to read. And these scriptures are very specially given. Now, I want you to notice in Romans chapter 15, if you want to turn over there, hold your spot here and look over at Romans chapter 15, because we're going to see here something that Paul says that I think we can pull out and say, well, this is why this is given. Now, I think Paul in this particular chapter is really focusing on the Gentiles because he's giving them hope that they had a purpose and a calling as well in this world. But here it says in chapter 15, verse 4, for whatever things were written aforetime were written for our learning. These were all written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the scriptures might have hope. So I think this expands to all of us, that when we read these things, we have hope in what God is going to do. So in this and other prophecies of Daniel, it's not the history of all the nations that we find mapped out, but only those which have to do with God's people, those that came in contact with Israel. And we'll see that. Now look at Daniel chapter 2 and verse 31. You, O king, saw, and behold, a great image. This image, which was mighty and whose brightness was excellent, stood before you, and the aspect thereof was terrible. Now, there's several things that he gives about this image right off the bat. So it really possessed 5 major features here. I'm going to give you these 5 major features of this great image. Number 1, it was gigantic. All right, if you want to talk about its dimensions, it was huge. Huge. It was very big. It was said to be a great image. Now, the image that was erected by King Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel chapter 3, which we haven't gotten to, was about 90 feet tall, including the pedestal. And figures of these monstrous proportions were familiar to the natives of Babylon and in Egypt as well. They saw these large images. And a gigantic human image or figure was really an appropriate symbol of the world, of man, with its great and universal monarchies succeeding each other. All right, so the second thing was it had a variety in its composition. So it all wasn't composed of the same thing. It had a variety. And we see that. We see that it had a head of gold. We see that it had a breast and arms of silver, a belly and thigh of brass, legs of iron terminating in feet, and toes partly of iron and partly of clay. So the great empires basically were to themselves, they have a diversity of character between the empires, distinguishing them from one another, while the character was uniform within them. Except in the last, where we see a diversity was to take place in the latter part of its existence. Now, some were amazing for splendor and riches, while others were remarkable for strength, power, and destructiveness. The first, most splendid, we see with the head of gold, the last, most powerful, degenerating into a mixture of weakness and strength with diversity among the toes, which really didn't bring about any unity, hardly at all. The head was unified with no diversity at all among it. All right, and the third part is, it was terrible. It was terrible. If you want to talk about its aspect, it was terrible. So it was an object of terror, even though it was brilliant. The form of a man, certainly powerful and stern. A mighty king, possibly. You know, when I think of the image, I always think of the Oscar. I don't know why I have that image in my head, which the Oscar, was formed after the creature of the Black Lagoon. So that's kind of what I have in my head. I don't know if it was like that or not. But, the overall image was one of power that caused terror. All right, and then the fourth part is its appearance was splendid. Its appearance was splendid. Its brightness was excellent, and the metals composing it, for the most part, were to dazzle the eyes of the beholder. I mean, you're always drawn to the head. Usually when you look at somebody, you're drawn to their face first. And that head of gold was amazing. It was splendor. It would bedazzle you. And it's kind of reminiscent, I think, of the tempter, of Satan, who would later show our Savior all the kingdoms of the world and the glory of them, attempting to bedazzle Jesus with the power that he said he could give him, with the brilliance and the carnality of it all. I mean, its contents, its lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, the pride of life. It was to bedazzle him, to try and take him over. And then 5, its character was symbolical. Its character was symbolical. This is the king's own conviction. He knew that there was symbolism in the dream, which is why he had such a desire for the interpretation of its dream. Now, dreams in ancient times would often take on this character. It was a common thing to have wise men whose business it was to interpret dreams. That was their, part of their job to do that. Verse 32 of Daniel 2, as for this image, its head was of fine gold, its breast and arms of silver, belly and its thighs of brass, its legs of iron, its feet part of iron and part clay. And you saw till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon its feet that were part iron and clay, and broke them in pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken in pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, so that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. That's the kingdom of God. This is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. O king, you are King of kings, unto whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the strength, and the glory. And wherever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the birds of the heavens has he given into your hand, and has made you to rule over all of them. You are the head of gold. It's pretty amazing. He sees this image, he sees this dream, and he says, God of heaven is telling you, you are the head of gold. The head of gold then represented the Babylonian Empire, of which Nebuchadnezzar was the king. Therefore, they're one and the same. This empire, from its riches, was represented by gold. I'll have you just write this down as a reference. In Isaiah chapter 14 and verse 4, the prophet Isaiah himself calls Babylon the golden city. He says, but you shall take up this parable against the king of Babylon and say, how has the oppressor ceased? The golden city ceased. And then write this down in Psalm 137 verse 8 as a reference. It says that Babylon is the cruel oppressor of God's people. And so we know that Nebuchadnezzar exhibited some of this cruelty and impetuousness about him. And you see that with his calling for the death of all the wise men of Babylon. And then you see it later when he wanted to throw his three friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, into the furnace. Strangely, at the same time, he was somewhat forgiving. He was somewhat slow-tempered as well. For instance, it took 3 rebellions of Judah for him to finally come in and say, I'm done, I've had it with all of this that's going on. It took him 3 rebellions for him to finally topple the temple. And he brought back the captives, and he let them act in many ways as citizens of Babylon, in many ways. He didn't kill Jeconiah and other kings might have done. He spared his life. He made a Judahite, Daniel, the second in charge of the empire of Babylon. So he had this sort of dual nature about him. Now I want you to start to think here, as we kind of shift a little bit, think about and consider the world in the time of 605 BC. This is when the captivity took place, after you had the Battle of Carchemish that took place, that subdued the Egyptians and the Assyrians, because remember, Babylon battled against them, they subdued them, and then they came down to take over Israel. So we had a vacuum that existed, a vacuum of power that existed in this whole Near East area now that once the Assyrians were defeated. And who's going to rule over Syria and the whole Mesopotamian area and Israel? And Nebuchadnezzar now, he's going to do it. I mean, he's defeated the last remaining powers in the region. There was nobody was going to step in. He was the one. Not one country, not one city-state. No one could challenge him for the power of taking the empire. Other nations were not attacking Babylon. Now, we do know that there were plenty of battles going on. The Nebuchadnezzar Chronicles lists the battles that would go on for the first 11 years of his reign to about 593. I don't think they took place in Babylon, though. And we know that he had many nations who were paying tribute to him. So he captured a great deal of spoils that he brought back to Babylon, including the spoils from the temple of Jerusalem, which were decked out in gold. And certainly all of these spoils were put to use in beautifying the city of Babylon. He made it beautiful. It was a splendor capital of the Near East. It was amazing by all accounts. He turned Babylon into a glittering capital. Fortified walls, grand temples, the processional way. He filled the city full of idols and cult centers. It was, in every aspect, a golden head. It was a golden head. It was brilliant and powerful, and it was deeply pagan. But even there, in that pagan scholarly world, God quietly used the learning and scribal tools of the Babylonians to preserve his own word through the Jewish scribes. I have no question, no doubt that they likely learned literary tools to scribe the Old Testament. The Jews did. Now I'd like you to look over at Jeremiah chapter 25. I want to show you here that God calls Nebuchadnezzar his servant. He was his servant. This king of the beast power was God's servant to fulfill his will. Jeremiah chapter 25 and verse 9. He says, "Behold, I will send and take all the families of the north, says the Eternal, and Nebuchadnezzar the king of Babylon, my servant, and will bring them against this land." Now this is from the north. Now if you remember anything about the topography, Babylon was to the east of Israel or Jerusalem. But you had a massive desert between there. So typically what they would do, if you're going to attack Israel, you're going to go up to the north and you're going to come down. That's why it was from the north. These families from the north, he was going to take all these, they were going to attack them from the north, and against the inhabitants thereof, and against all these nations round about, and will utterly destroy them, and make them an astonishment and a hissing and perpetual desolation. Now look over at Jeremiah 27 and verse 6. Here's another place where he's going to call Nebuchadnezzar my servant. Jeremiah 27, verse 6, and now have I given all these lands into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant. And the beasts of the field have I given him also to serve him. So we know that Jeremiah urged the kings of Judah to act as Nebuchadnezzar's loyal vassals rather than to seek independence or cooperation with Egypt against Babylon. Because God said, this is what I'm going to do. This is going to come to pass. And Jeremiah was told, make sure you tell them this is my will. You need to go ahead and cooperate. And because he spoke in favor of Nebuchadnezzar, Jeremiah did, he barely avoided capital punishment from the Jews. He was banned from the temple. He endured beatings. He nearly starved to death in prison. Look at Jeremiah 39. Jeremiah 39. When the Babylonians eventually conquered Jerusalem, we see that Nebuchadnezzar showed Jeremiah great respect and unusual liberty because he felt he was on his side. Look at Jeremiah 39, verse 11. Now Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, gave charge concerning Jeremiah to, how do I pronounce this? Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, saying, take him and look well to him, and do him no harm, but do unto him even as he shall say to you. There's much freedom for Jeremiah. And even they sent and took Jeremiah out of the court of the prison and committed him to Gedaliah, the son of Ahikam. Am I saying that right? Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, and he should carry him home, so he dwelt among the people. So he was very good to Jeremiah. Now, here's something that I find interesting. Even though the Jews were taken captive to a strange place, here's what I want you to notice, what God says to them. And he says this in Jeremiah chapter 29. Look over at Jeremiah 29. I think this is very important for us. Jeremiah 29, and look at verse 4. We'll read down to verse 7. Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, unto all that are carried away captives, whom I have caused to be carried away from Jerusalem unto Babylon. Build you houses, and dwell in them, and plant gardens, and eat the fruit of them. Take wives, beget sons and daughters, and take wives for your sons, and give your daughters to husbands, that they may bear sons and daughters, that you may be increased there and not diminished. And seek the peace of the city, where I have caused you to be carried away captive, and pray unto the Lord for it. For in the peace thereof you shall have peace. Now, I want you to stop and consider for a moment, brethren. We live in a free country today. But we've seen our freedoms wax and we've seen our freedoms wane in our time. And it is a terrible thing to see the decay of a nation right before your very eyes when it wanes. Now, we are not in literal Babylon today. We're not there. But in many ways, we may feel the pressures of a Babylon today. In our culture itself, our culture is primarily opposed to God. Institutions are turning away from biblical values. They turn away from laws, from policies, and that grieves us. That grieves us. And in many ways, it makes you feel like you're in a spiritual Babylon. But Babylon was not a place that the people of God really were going to affect any change. God didn't send them there to change the nation. They weren't going to change anything, no deep political change in that culture. God was the one that put them there because of their disobedience and rebellion. And God was the one that was going to take them out when the time was fulfilled, when the 70 years of land rest was accomplished. Today, we see conservatives fighting for our freedoms that are being eroded away from the liberal element. We see that going on. The AMA had passed a resolution. I remember taking away our religious or personal exemptions for child vaccinations. A few years ago, they did this. They also passed a resolution, I remember, that basically said there was no medical reason for a trans individual to serve in the military. Our money, as we all know, is being stolen away from us on a regular basis through theft of the government in various ways through inflation, but also by taking it from us and giving it to immigrants or illegal immigrants who are here. I mean, we went through an unprecedented time of restrictions during COVID with limits on church gatherings, coming together, forced mask wearing, and in some cases, vaccinations, which I was under that pressure as well, and I was willing to say, I will stop working, so I didn't have to take it. Those were the pressures that we were under. Now, thankfully, we are seeing pushback against all of that. And it's a battle to keep tyranny at bay. But we know this won't be the end of it, sadly. We know that this is not God's kingdom. And we'll see oppression increase, and it's prophesied to happen even more on God's people as time goes on. So how are we to respond to these things? Well, God gives us a very simple, practical answer. Build houses, plant gardens, eat the fruit, take wives, have children. You see, Babylon was filled with cult temples, with astrologers, with diviners, false pagan gods. But God says, I want you to live your life to the best that you can do, and I will take care of you. Oh, and pray for Babylon. Pray for its peace, because when there's peace there, there's peace with you as well. You see, that applies not just to geopolitics. Babylon was their geographic captivity. But for some of us, our Babylon personally may be a health trial. That could be it. A family situation. Maybe it's a financial burden. Something that feels like we've been pulled away from the comforts of Jerusalem. And we're in Babylon. And you may be oppressed with a health trial that has seemingly pulled you away from the comforts of Jerusalem, but know that God has allowed you to be there. He knows what you're going through. And what are we to do? To seek peace. Seek peace in the city. Seek peace in the situation that you're in, that God says, I have caused you to be carried away captive, and to pray to the Lord for it. Look at Jeremiah chapter 29 and verse 8. For thus says the Eternal, the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, let not your prophets and your diviners that be in the midst of you deceive you, neither hearken to your dreams which you cause to be dreamed, for they prophesy falsely unto you in my name. I have not sent them, says the Eternal. So when temptations rise up around you, as they always do, don't go after them. There were plenty of false prophets and sorcerers and diviners in Babylon. I mean, even dreams that would come to them in lying ways, or interpreters of dreams that would tell them what they wanted to hear for their own ends. But those are deceitful. So if we're held captive by trials, we need to look to God. And we need to count on Him that's going to take care of us in His timing. You see, God is laying out here, brethren, in Daniel, the course we see of Gentile history in this chapter, and He's using it for His purpose for His people. And so even in our difficulties, God lays out the plan, and He sees the end from the beginning. So we may have been taken captive in another way, but what should we do? Again, live our lives, seek peace in the place you're in, and as the Apostle Paul said, in whatever state you find yourselves, therewith be content. Be content. So if we seek peace and we pray for it, then you will have peace, even if you're in the shadow of the great image.